Please be seated.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish but to fulfill. My dear brothers and sisters, these words of Jesus in our gospel today would speak about the connection of the old law and the new law, in which at times we don't see the link. And Jesus is connecting the old and the new. That is why he said to his disciples, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish but to fulfill. These words may not be clear, the meaning, but the first reading even would speak about this, that laws or covenant are not of the letter, but of the Spirit. St. Paul even says in our first reading today, when he said, my dear brothers and sisters, that not that out of ourselves we are qualified to take credit for anything as coming from us. Rather, our qualification comes from God. We are indeed qualified as ministers of a new covenant, not of letter but of spirit. For the letter brings death, but the Spirit gives life. A deeper understanding of this, my dear brothers and sisters, is that generally we have this understanding of laws. Generally, we have this understanding of ordinances. And usually laws, ordinances, rules are set to give order, to set order. But we know that the strict impositions of orders and laws sometimes also defines death, in which we know that laws, they have their purpose to set orders so that there is a kind of harmony, there is a kind of guide, directions of community. That is why we have to set laws and orders. Come to think of it, if we don't have any rule, come to think of it, if we don't have these protocols of the IATF in this time of pandemic, we might have more than those who have died of this pandemic. If we don't have this quarantine, general community quarantine, modified general community quarantine, or health protocols, if we just do what we want in this time of pandemic, I think we were not able to mitigate and also to minimize the numbers of cases. And perhaps, siguro, konti na lang po yung naiiwan kung wala po tayong sinusunod na batas hinggil sa pandemya. If we don't have these protocols that we follow today. But what Jesus Christ is telling to us, my dear brothers and sisters, that's true. Laws, rules, ordinances are very important to set order and to give direction. But let us not forget that above, and very important, is not actually the letter, but the very spirit of the law, in which it defines the law should not only impose, but also must have this spirit, the spirit of righteousness, spirit of peace, of love, of justice, most especially. Which is, my dear brothers and sisters, the very highest form of law is the law of God. And the law of God is no other than the law of love. And the law of love of God is based on justice and mercy. Which is, we are being reminded, and I think this is the spirit of the law, in which sometimes we may be strict. Sometimes we see that it's so imposing. Sometimes, through St. Paul says that it's not about the letter because the letter brings death. But the Spirit is very important because it gives life. Because after all, my dear brothers and sisters, is that the very origin of all these things, laws, ordinances, rules, guidelines, and protocols, are in fact because of the very love of God to us. And also our very love for one another. And that we should always be guided by the very spirit of the law. And this is the spirit of love and the spirit of life. And that is should not lead to death. It should not promote death, but should promote life, most especially. My dear brothers and sisters, that is why Jesus, when he said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets, but I come to fulfill it." Because Jesus is the very law, Jesus who is our life, who is our love, who is our guide. That is why, my dear brothers and sisters, let us always remember that above all, the very important is that let us live the spirit, not the letter of the law.